Yeshuans place strong emphasis on the historical critical method in the reading of the Bible. This means that Scripture is understood as a collection of texts that emerged over time within specific historical, cultural, and religious contexts. The texts are not read primarily as literal descriptions of factual events, but as theological reflections shaped by human beings seeking to understand God, the world, and humanity's place in history. This also applies to the Tanakh, often referred to as the Old Testament. Its narratives are not necessarily read literally, and the figures within them are not automatically understood as historical individuals in the modern sense. Characters such as Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Joshua can be read as theological and pedagogical figures, carriers of meaning, experience, and identity, rather than as people who must have lived exactly as described. A literal interpretation of some of these narratives also creates serious ethical problems, particularly regarding the character of God. The story of the Garden of Eden is a clear example. If read literally, it becomes difficult to explain why God would plant a deadly tree in the midst of the garden, grant humans access to it, and then forbid its use, while at the same time allowing a serpent to deceive them. In such a reading, humanity appears almost destined to fail from the beginning. Responsibility is placed on the humans, even though the conditions make failure seem inevitable. The story loses coherence as a moral narrative. When read allegorically, these problems largely disappear. The Garden of Eden can then be understood as a reflection on human maturity, responsibility, choice, and the loss of innocence. The tree represents the limits of human autonomy, and the serpent becomes a symbol of temptation or misguided wisdom. The point is not a historical event, but a profound insight into the human condition. The same applies to the story of Noah and the flood. A literal reading assumes a dichotomous view of humanity, innocent or guilty, with no shades in between. The entire human population is judged collectively and subjected to the same punishment, regardless of actions, intent, or degree of responsibility. When this is combined with the doctrine of original sin, the result is a concept of justice without nuance, where all human beings are born equally guilty and therefore equally deserving of judgment. Divine justice becomes mechanical and absolute. Yet the Noah narrative does not end with judgment. It ends with covenant. God enters into a covenant with Noah, and this covenant applies to all humanity. It encompasses all people who live with hope and responsibility in the world. The rainbow becomes a sign that life has a future, despite human fallibility. This is a universal covenant. It does not presuppose a particular people, law, or theological system, but establishes a basic ethical framework for humanity as a whole. Later in the Tanakh, the idea of covenant is further developed through Abraham. Here the covenant becomes more particular. Abraham becomes the ancestor of a specific people, but not for the purpose of exclusion. On the contrary, this people is called to bring blessing to all the families of the earth. The universal and the particular are not in opposition, but exist in service to one another. When we turn to the Gospels, this theological storytelling tradition continues. The miracle narratives are not read as scientific or journalistic reports, but as Jewish midrash, stories that employ symbolism and familiar biblical motifs to express who Yeshua is and what his life signifies. The Gospels contain multiple layers, ranging from possible historical memory to explicit theological reflection shaped by the faith and needs of early communities. Paul represents a different theological trajectory. He reads the Eden narrative literally, with a historical Adam serving as the foundation for the doctrine of original sin. Without this literal assumption, the doctrine of original sin collapses. It is important to note that this doctrine is not explicitly found in the Tanakh, but is a later theological construction, further developed within church tradition. In the Tanakh, individuals are held accountable for their own actions, not for an inherited state of guilt. This means that Paul is read historically and critically. He is not rejected, but understood as one voice among several in the early movement. His theology cannot automatically be made normative for the entire biblical tradition. The historical critical method allows this development to be seen as a coherent whole. The texts are read as theological reflections on responsibility, justice, hope, and human fallibility. Faith is no longer about defending literal interpretations, but about living in the spirit of the covenant, universally grounded in humanity and concretely expressed through responsibility and blessing. In this way, the approach offers a realistic, healthy, and grounded theology, not because the Bible is stripped of meaning, but because it is allowed to speak with its full depth. Faith becomes more mature, more ethically coherent, and better equipped to engage both reason and human experience. Thank you for listening. You are welcome to share thoughts, questions, additions, or corrections in the comments. Such contributions are deeply appreciated. Peace and blessing.